Now perilous death had rejected me, and glory, no doubt of that, and the wretched drunkenness of his own feelings, the piercing grief, the radiant farewells, the call of the grand cause, another name for the tropical sun, and the women's gallant tears, and the dark longing, and the sweet heavy power propelling him toward the pinnacle of manliness. Now all of this was done. Finished.
Hello, my name is Lucas, this is Bit of Lit, and I'm here, horribly sick, but I'm here to talk about The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea, written by Yukio Mishima, who was the 20th century post-war Japan author. And I don't say that lightly, he was the author. He was the guy. Right up until he tried to use his private military that he fostered to overthrow the government of Japan and proceeded to commit seppuku publicly. Because this guy was a right-wing nationalist nutjob who wrote incredibly beautiful prose. This book was translated by John Nathan, and it says that Time said, a major work of art. I agree. This is a beautifully written book. Very, very clever ways at looking at the inner psychology of the characters, or of a character, at least two characters, I should say. However, this book is just ridiculously problematic. I think. I would like to know what you guys think of this novel if you've read it, or any of his other books. I do intend to read more before I give up on this nut job. But I enjoyed this novel, so yeah, I don't know. It's quite confusing. I'm not sure what to think, because it's almost like my enjoyment of this is very similar to Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein, which is a completely ridiculous, insane fascist novel. And this is not necessarily fascist, but it is extremely narcissistic. And fascism is narcissistic too, so that's another story for another time. But this novel follows three characters, and then there's some side characters who are some young 13-year-old boys that are part of a gang with Noru, who is our main boy character, at least, who watches his mom have sex with a sailor, the one who falls from grace with the sea, through a peephole. First of all, problem number one, anybody who is flirting with any kind of Freudian psychology immediately goes to the doghouse for me. But it doesn't really get Oedipal too much beyond that. But that's really weird, right? I mean, that's not normal to write about. That's like childish to use, but as a way of looking at the psychology of a person. Noboru has a deep fascination with the sea and with sailors and everything nautical, and he really admires Ryuji, who is the sailor. His mother's name is Fusako, and this is another problem with the novel. We do get bits and pieces of what she's thinking throughout, but they are extremely domestic, traditionally feminine, kind of misogynist things, very pro-patriarchal kind of view of a woman. I don't know if his other books are like that, or what, but yeah, her main goal here is to fawn over Ryuji and miss him, and then be worried what other people think about her. But at least that's how I read it. And then Ryuji is a pretty interesting character. Noboru is not so much, and we'll get to that, but Ryuji is, he's a guy who's always been on the sea. He's always worked as a sailor or doing odd jobs, and he's always been out there, very rarely tied to the land. And in a way, he always felt like he was searching for something, possibly the great cause. whatever that is. But feeling like the sea promises the great cause, which we will talk about, but never being able to reach it. Eventually, at the turning point of this novel, Ryuji decides that he is going to give up his life on the sea and live a domestic, romantic life with Fusako, and they're going to get married. Fusako doesn't have a husband at the beginning of the novel because 5 years prior, her husband died when Noboru was 8. And I was thinking while I was reading this that maybe, especially from that turning point on, Noboru's sudden change from admiration to disdain for Ryuji was related to this kind of thing. Like maybe he was hurt by losing his father, but the other boys that he hangs out with do have their fathers, and they think the same thing about fathers. So we will get to what I think that is all about and why this novel is psychotic in its narcissism. I'm saying these words quite loosely, but also truly. Yeah, it's very strange because he really admires Ryuji at the beginning. He feels like, oh yeah, Ryuji, he's out there on the sea where men should be, I suppose, you know, learning what it means to be a man, searching for the great cause, and coming to land to, you know, get a little bit wet, shall we say. He really admires him for that and thinks that's really cool until he decides to have a domestic life with his mother. And then he wants to have him killed. So they plan to do that. And they make a plan and lure him to a hidden away place. And then in that scene where they're like getting ready to kill him, they're giving him tea, which they have laced with a kind of poison. And then they're going to completely dissect him and chop him up into pieces and let the blood fill the void of this empty world all over the land so it can drip down to the sea and become one with the sea again. Because that's completely normal. These kids are truly insane. They do the same thing to a cat in the middle of the book, and it is extremely graphic and disturbing to read, but that doesn't really bother me as much as what I think this is trying to get at. And if we think about, you know, like I said, with what he was doing in his spare time when he wasn't an author, with his own private military and also the body training, which is fine, I suppose, but very narcissistic kind of guy. Who, by the way, lived under the Bushido code and fancied himself a pen and sword kind of person. He is the author is a fascinating person, completely deranged. And this novel is completely deranged too. And I enjoy it. Anyway, like I said before, when I was reading this, like before we get to the very end, and they say, the worst thing you can be is a father. Ah, there are worse things than getting beaten. The worst thing you can have is a father. Ah, I hate fathers. We hate fathers. All this crazy stuff going on. No real exploration of that I could understand, at least. Maybe it's something not lost translating into English, but it just seems like, oh, you're not looking for the great cause anymore. What's wrong with you? You're not a man anymore. That kind of thing. So what is the great cause? Well, this was another important thing for Yukio Mishima, who thought that the great cause was a heroic way to die for something that you believe in, something that you care about. For example, a nationalistic Japanese government, which is why he committed seppuku. I think that the boys are Yukio expressing his anger and frustration with the way that Japan was changing and modernizing and becoming perhaps less Japanese because of the American occupation. It doesn't really touch on that too much, that kind of thing about like the American occupation. It makes some little references here and there, so probably is something to that. But yeah, and with the opening to the West and all that stuff, and becoming allies and having trade negotiations and more foreigners coming in, all that stuff, all the culture of Japan changing and maybe losing some of its traditional values. Something deeply concerning for him, I suppose. And likewise, there was no great cause to be found, right? I mean, Ryuji kind of gives up the search for it because he feels like there is a promise there of a great cause in the modern world, in the time that he was living in, modern Japan. For him, there was no great cause, and there was nothing to heroically die for, right? Because it was not a militaristic nation as it used to be. Something very odd about him. He was very upset that Emperor Hirohito denounced his divinity because then all the soldiers died for nothing. Is something that he believed. So, you know, take that how you will. Anyway, I do believe that the boys are his frustration with the modernizing Japan, losing those traditions, losing the great cause, and way to die for something you believe in a heroic way, which he does at the end of his life. It was his great cause. I think that's what is going on here. I don't know how else to understand it. With that said, I think that makes it extremely narcissistic because the boys, all these boys, especially Noboru, who we get to understand a little bit better. I mean, some of the things that he gets upset about are so funny. I just can't. Some of the things that he gets mad at Ryuji for are just so funny, and then he has to fight with himself about, no, it doesn't count. I can't put it on this list of grievances I have with Ryuji. But like, they are self-absorbed, thoughtless killing machines, essentially. And that's what he wanted. I guess. Yeah, I suppose in a way it maybe is fascistic, although it doesn't necessarily touch on politics in that sense, but it is pining for the old days, right? I don't know. What do you guys think?